She walked into her own house and found another woman wearing it like a crown. The Whitman mansion glowed at the end of the long Connecticut driveway, every window lit warm against the cold evening, every inch of the white-columned house dressed for celebration. Valet attendants moved between black SUVs and silver sedans. Soft jazz spilled through the open front doors. Champagne glasses chimed under the crystal chandelier Claire Whitman had chosen 10 years earlier, back when this place still smelled of fresh paint, cedar wood, and the lavender her mother planted along the stone path. Tonight, that same lavender had been cut, tied with pale ribbon, and arranged across the engagement table like a decoration that had never belonged to anyone. Vanessa Cole stood beneath the chandelier in a champagne-colored satin dress, smiling at the guests as if the house had been waiting for her all along. On her finger, Daniel Whitman's diamond caught the light every time she lifted her hand. People laughed softly around her, people Claire did not know, people standing in the living room where her wedding portrait once hung, people drinking beside the fireplace where her mother used to sit with a wool blanket over her knees. Above them all, still untouched on the far wall, was the framed portrait of Eleanor Hayes, Claire's mother, watching the room with the same quiet dignity she had carried in life. Vanessa had not removed it. Maybe she thought it looked expensive. Maybe she did not know whose eyes were looking down on her. Daniel stood beside Vanessa in a navy suit, one hand resting at her back, his smile polished and empty. He had always known how to look calm in a room full of people. He had looked that way at charity dinners, at court hearings, at the final meeting with the divorce attorneys. Tonight, he looked even more certain, as if the house, the guests, the music, and the woman beside him were proof that he had won. Then the front door opened, and the air changed. Claire stepped inside wearing a simple black dress beneath a cream wool coat, her hair pinned low, her face still. No jewels except her mother's pearl earrings. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. Just the quiet sound of her heels crossing the marble floor she had paid to restore after a winter pipe burst 8 years ago. One by one, the guests turned. The laughter thinned. Daniel's smile tightened before he could hide it. Vanessa saw her and lifted her glass higher, pretending surprise but enjoying every second of it. "How sweet," Vanessa said, her voice bright enough to cut. The previous wife came to bless the future one. A few guests gave uncertain smiles. Someone coughed. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his voice but not enough to keep the room from hearing. "Claire, you shouldn't be here." Claire did not look at him first. She looked at the staircase, the fireplace, the portrait, the lavender scattered across the table like stolen memory. Then she looked at Vanessa's hand on the banister her mother once gripped when she was too weak to climb. Claire's fingers closed gently around the old brass key in her coat pocket. She had not come to argue. She had not come to cry. She had come because some doors should only be closed by the person who survived what happened behind them. Claire did not answer Daniel right away, because the room around him was speaking louder than he was. The staircase still curved toward the second floor with the same dark walnut rail her mother had chosen from a small workshop outside Hartford. The fireplace still held the faint, uneven line where Claire had once knelt with a sponge and cleaned soot from the stone after Daniel forgot to open the flue during their first Christmas in the house. The kitchen beyond the archway still carried the soft glow of brass pendant lights she had ordered after saving for 6 months, back when Daniel called them unnecessary and then later accepted compliments for their warmth. Every corner remembered her, even if the people in it pretended not to. 10 years earlier, when Eleanor Hayes signed the final papers leaving the property to her only daughter, Claire had not seen a mansion. She had seen a tired old house with cracked paint, frozen pipes, and a garden sleeping under 3 feet of Connecticut snow. She had been 29 then, newly married, still believing love meant building something with both hands and not asking who carried more weight. Daniel had loved the address before he loved the work. He liked the long driveway, the stone columns, the way people paused when they heard the neighborhood name. Claire loved the loose floorboard outside the library because her mother used to hide birthday cards beneath it. She loved the narrow back stairs because Eleanor used them when she could still move without help. She loved the lavender because her mother planted it the spring after her first round of treatment and said the house needed something brave enough to come back every year. So Claire came back every year too. She patched walls. She met contractors at 7 in the morning with coffee in one hand and invoices in the other. She sold a pair of diamond studs from her grandmother to restore the windows Daniel said were too expensive to save. She learned the names of plumbers, roofers, gardeners, and county clerks. She signed checks from the account Eleanor had left for property maintenance, while Daniel told friends they were renovating their estate. At parties, he stood beside the fireplace and said, "We wanted to preserve the original character," as if he had ever stood in the dust with Claire while workers pulled old insulation from the walls. Claire never corrected him. Back then, she thought generosity was a language marriage understood. Then the late nights began. The guarded phone calls on the porch. The sudden business dinners that left cologne in the hallway long after midnight. Vanessa's name first appeared as a contact Daniel said was connected to a nonprofit gala. Later, it appeared on restaurant receipts, hotel parking validations, and finally in a text message Claire saw by accident while Daniel was in the shower. He did not deny it with shame. He denied it with irritation, as if Claire had embarrassed him by noticing. By the time the divorce papers arrived, Daniel had already learned to speak of the house as if it had chosen him over her. Now, standing beneath the chandelier Claire had cleaned by hand before her mother's last Thanksgiving, he looked at her like she was a guest who had overstayed. But Claire looked at the walls, the stairs, the lavender, and the portrait watching from above, and she understood something he never had. A home does not belong to the person who performs ownership the loudest. It belongs to the one who paid the cost of keeping it alive. The silence after Daniel's words did not last, because Vanessa knew exactly how to fill a room when she wanted to wound someone without leaving fingerprints. She stepped forward with her champagne glass held lightly between two fingers, the diamond on her hand flashing beneath the chandelier, as if it had been hired for the evening. "Please, Daniel," she said with a little laugh, turning just enough for the guests to hear. "Do not be rude. Claire should stay for a minute. It must be emotional seeing how beautiful the house looks now." A few people smiled because they did not understand the cruelty folded inside the sentence. Others looked away because they did. Claire remained near the entryway, her coat still buttoned, her hand still resting around the old brass key in her pocket. Across the room, a string quartet recording played softly from hidden speakers, too elegant for the tension growing under it. Vanessa moved toward the engagement table, where white candles burned beside silver trays and small cards printed with her name and Daniel's in raised gold lettering. She lifted one of the lavender bundles and let the ribbon slip through her fingers. "I found these in the garden," she said. "They were a little wild, but I thought they could be useful if someone finally knew how to arrange them." That was when Claire's eyes changed, not loudly, not enough for the guests to name it, but enough for Daniel to notice. The lavender had been Eleanor's. Every spring, Claire's mother used to kneel by the stone path with gardening gloves too large for her hands, trimming the stems and saying the flowers had a better memory than people. Vanessa placed the bundle back beside the cake as if it were nothing more than color for a table. Then she raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice sweet and sharp. "Some women leave a house behind. Other women know how to make it a home." The toast landed exactly where she wanted it to. "Hey!" Ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. Daniel did not stop it. He stood beside Vanessa with his hand at her waist, wearing the careful expression of a man who had decided silence would cost him less than decency. Claire looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw no trace of the husband who once carried moving boxes through the snow and promised her mother he would take care of both the house and the woman who inherited it. That man had either vanished or had never existed outside Claire's hope. On the polished floor near the table, one pale lavender petal had fallen beneath the heel of a guest who did not see it. Claire stepped forward. The room tightened, waiting for a scene, waiting for tears, waiting for the kind of collapse that would make Vanessa's victory complete. But Claire only bent down and picked up the petal. She held it in her palm for a moment, small and bruised at the edge, then closed her fingers around it with the gentleness of someone saving the last clean thing in a room full of performance. Vanessa's smile flickered. Daniel shifted his weight. Claire straightened and looked at the portrait of her mother above the fireplace. Eleanor's painted eyes seemed calm, almost patient. Claire slipped the petal into the pocket beside the key and finally spoke, her voice low enough that the room had to lean toward it. "You have made it look different," she said. "But different is not the same as yours." No one laughed after that. Even the hidden music seemed suddenly too loud. Vanessa's face hardened behind her perfect smile, and Daniel took half a step toward Claire, as if he could still manage the room by standing taller in it. But Claire had already learned the shape of his pride. She knew where it cracked. And tonight, for the first time, she had not come to protect him from hearing it. Daniel's half-step toward Claire looked small to everyone else, but Claire recognized it immediately. It was the old movement, the one he used when a conversation began slipping out of his hands. He would close the distance, lower his voice, smooth the edge of the moment until the other person felt unreasonable for noticing the truth. For years it had worked because Claire had loved peace more than winning. She had softened her words at dinner tables, changed subjects in front of friends, and carried private wounds quietly so Daniel could remain admired in public. But that version of her had been left behind 3 weeks earlier, in a glass-walled law office 30 miles away in downtown Hartford, where rain slid down the windows and a man named Ethan Caldwell placed a folder on the table between them. Ethan was not dramatic. He did not raise his voice or promise revenge. He wore a gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm that came from reading every line before making a move. "Claire," he had said, turning the first page toward her, "this house was never marital property. It was transferred to you through your mother's estate before the refinancing Daniel keeps referencing. His name is not on the deed." Claire remembered staring at the paper until the words blurred, not because she doubted them, but because she had spent so long listening to Daniel speak, as if certainty could become ownership if repeated often enough. Ethan showed her the county record, the trust documents, the property tax history, and the signed agreement Daniel had initialed during the renovation loan process, acknowledging that the house remained her separate property. Then came the photographs from the neighbor across the road, the catering permits requested under Daniel's name, the overnight deliveries for Vanessa, the decorator invoices, the change of locks, and the private security contract Claire had never approved. None of it looked emotional on paper. That was what made it powerful. The betrayal had been messy, humiliating, and human, but the evidence was clean. Dates, signatures, notices, receipts. Ethan had already sent the first formal demand for Daniel to vacate after the divorce settlement became final. Daniel ignored it. A second notice followed by certified mail. Daniel signed for it and did nothing. A third warning named Vanessa as an unauthorized occupant and advised that any event held on the property, without Claire's consent, could trigger enforcement. Daniel's response had been a text message to Claire that read, "Stop embarrassing yourself." She had not answered. Instead, she had sat at her small rented kitchen table later that night, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and signed the petition Ethan prepared. Her apartment was only 650 square feet, with a view of a parking lot and a radiator that clicked at 2 in the morning. Still, for the first time in years, every cup in the cabinet was exactly where she left it. Every room was honest. She had learned that peace did not always arrive as comfort. Sometimes it arrived as paperwork, a black pen, and the decision to stop asking permission to reclaim what was already hers. Now, back in the living room, with Vanessa's guests watching and Daniel pretending the past 3 weeks had not happened, Claire felt the weight of that folder without carrying it. The papers were not in her hands. They did not need to be. They were already moving toward the house, stamped, signed, and impossible to flatter. Claire had expected Daniel to deny the paperwork when it arrived, but what surprised her over the past 3 weeks was how easily Vanessa built a throne on top of warnings she had never bothered to understand. To Vanessa, the mansion was not a home with a history. It was a backdrop, a white-column stage for photographs, brunches, engagement announcements, and soft smiles posted online before midnight. She changed the linen curtains in the front parlor because she thought the old ones looked too traditional. She ordered new gold-rimmed dinner plates from a boutique in Westport and told the delivery crew to leave them in my dining room. She sent a decorator through the second floor with fabric samples and instructions to make the primary bedroom feel less haunted by someone else's taste. The decorator had paused when she saw Eleanor Hayes's portrait still wrapped in tissue in the upstairs hall, waiting to be rehung after Daniel moved it from the fireplace without telling Claire. Vanessa only glanced at it and said, "Store that somewhere. It feels heavy." But the house resisted her in quiet ways. The new curtains never fell evenly because the old rods had been custom fitted by Claire. After the window restoration, The delivery crew kept calling the number on the county record, which still belonged to Claire. The neighborhood association sent notices addressed to Ms. Claire Whitman, owner of record, and Daniel tossed them into a drawer beneath unpaid landscaping invoices. Vanessa noticed the mail but did not read it. She trusted Daniel's confidence because it sounded expensive. Once the final details are handled, Daniel told her one morning, standing at the kitchen island with his phone in one hand and a coffee he had not made in the other, "This place will be ours in every way that matters." Vanessa believed him because believing him gave her the life she wanted. She imagined summer parties on the back lawn, her name added to the country club roster, charity boards, holiday cards mailed from an address people recognized. She imagined walking through town and being seen not as the woman who came after, but as the woman who replaced. Daniel let her imagine it. He needed her admiration the way some men need mirrors. What he did not tell her was that Ethan Caldwell's office had called twice, that the third legal notice had been delivered by certified mail, and that a court date had already been requested after Daniel ignored the demand to vacate. He did not tell her that Claire had not begged, not negotiated, not sent another emotional message he could twist into proof that she was unstable. She had gone quiet, and Daniel mistook that quiet for surrender because he had never understood the difference between silence and preparation. Back in the living room, Vanessa still stood beside the engagement table, trying to recover the room with a smile sharp enough to glitter. She slipped her arm through Daniel's and lifted her chin toward Claire. "You know," she said, "I really did hope tonight could be graceful." Claire looked at her, then at the lavender bundles, then at the drawer near the sideboard where Daniel used to hide things he did not want to face. For a moment, she could almost see the unopened envelopes inside it, stacked under Vanessa's seating chart and the receipt for 200 imported candles. "Grace requires truth," Claire said. Softly, Vanessa blinked, as if the word had landed in a language she did not speak. Daniel's jaw tightened. Around them, the guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Somewhere near the front of the house, beyond the thick glass and heavy doors, tires rolled slowly over the gravel driveway. Claire heard them before anyone else did. She did not turn. She did not need to. Some arrivals announced themselves with music and champagne. Others came with headlights, county seals, and consequences. The sound from the driveway folded into the room so quietly that most of the guests missed it at first. They were still watching Claire, waiting for her to explain herself, waiting for Daniel to dismiss her, waiting for Vanessa to reclaim the center of the evening with another polished sentence. But Claire was no longer standing only in the present. She remembered the morning the invitation arrived, 3 days earlier, inside the narrow mailbox outside her rented apartment in New Haven. It was thick, cream-colored, and expensive, with her name written in Vanessa's careful script as if they were old friends exchanging holiday cards. Inside was a photograph of the mansion lit at dusk, the front lawn glowing under strings of rented lights. Below it, Vanessa had written, "You should see what Daniel and I have done with the place." Claire had read the words once while standing in the hallway with her grocery bag against her hip, a carton of eggs pressed into her side. Her coffee was going cold on the kitchen counter. For one sharp second, the apartment seemed too small to hold the insult. Then she set the invitation beside the sink, took the eggs from the bag, and placed them one by one into the refrigerator as if tenderness toward ordinary things could keep a person from breaking. She did not call Daniel. She did not call Vanessa. She called Ethan Caldwell. By noon, she was sitting across from him in his office, the invitation lying between them like evidence that had delivered itself. Ethan read the handwritten line, removed his glasses, and looked at her with careful restraint. "This is not just arrogance," he said. "This is useful." Claire almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because something inside her finally understood the shape of the ending. Vanessa thought she had sent a ticket to humiliation. Instead, she had put the date, the location, the unauthorized event, and her own confidence in writing. Ethan did not ask Claire whether she wanted revenge. He asked whether she wanted the enforcement request filed before the party or served during it. Claire looked out at the rain moving across Hartford, at office workers hurrying under black umbrellas, at the gray city doing what cities do, continuing without concern for heartbreak. "During," she said, and the word surprised her with how calm it sounded. That evening, back in her apartment, Claire took out the black dress she had worn to her mother's memorial dinner years ago, not because she wanted sorrow, but because it reminded her that she had survived endings before. She polished her mother's pearl earrings with a soft cloth. She found the old brass key in a small ceramic bowl beside the bed and held it until the ridges pressed into her palm. Before leaving for the mansion, she signed the final authorization Ethan's courier brought at sunset. Her hand did not tremble, not once. Now, inside the living room, Vanessa still believed Claire had come alone, empty-handed, wounded enough to be displayed. Daniel believed the same because it was easier than admitting he had underestimated the woman he trained himself to dismiss. Claire heard another car door close outside. Then another. The gravel settled under slow footsteps. Daniel turned his head toward the entry hall, irritation crossing his face before concern could catch up. Vanessa's smile thinned. Claire simply stood beneath her mother's portrait, one hand in her coat pocket around the key, the lavender petal folded beside it, and waited for the house to hear the knock it had been owed. The knock came before Daniel could decide whether to ignore the headlights outside. 3 firm taps against the front door, not loud enough to sound dramatic, but clear enough to cut through every conversation in the house. The music kept playing for 2 more seconds, then someone near the speaker lowered the volume until the strings faded into a thin, embarrassed hush. Daniel turned toward the entry hall with the expression he used for minor inconveniences, the one that said staff should have handled this before it reached him. "I will take care of it," he muttered, mostly to Vanessa, but loud enough for Claire to hear. Vanessa lifted her chin and smiled at the room, trying to make the interruption feel like part of the evening. "Probably another delivery," she said. "You know how these events are." But Claire saw the small tightening around her eyes. Daniel walked past Claire without looking at her, his shoulder nearly brushing the cream wool of her coat. He opened the door only halfway, as if the house were still obeying him. Cold air slipped inside first, carrying the smell of wet gravel and winter leaves. On the front step stood 2 uniformed officers, a county enforcement officer in a dark overcoat, and Ethan Caldwell, calm beneath the porch light with a leather folder tucked under one arm. Daniel's face changed so quickly it was almost silent. Confidence did not leave him all at once. It drained in careful layers. First the annoyance disappeared, then the color beneath his tan, then the practiced smile he had worn for every guest in the room. "This is a private event," Daniel said, his voice lower now. Ethan did not move forward until the county officer asked for Daniel Whitman by full name. Hearing it spoken at the threshold made several guests step closer without meaning to. Vanessa froze near the engagement table, one hand resting against the edge of the linen cloth, her ring flashing above the candles. Claire stayed where she was beneath her mother's portrait. She did not turn the moment into theater. She let it arrive on its own. The county officer held up a sealed document. "Mr. Whitman, we are here regarding enforcement of a court-approved order involving this property." Daniel gave a short laugh that fooled no one. "There has been a mistake." Then, as if remembering the audience behind him, he turned sharply toward Claire. "Did you do this?" Every face followed his question across the room. Vanessa's mouth parted, but no words came out. Claire looked at Daniel the way a person looks at a door that has been locked from the wrong side for too many years. "No," she said softly. "You did." The answer landed colder than anger. Daniel took a step into the room, trying to reclaim height, sound, control. "Claire, this is my house now. You need to leave before you embarrass yourself any further." It was the sentence he had been saving all night, the one meant to place her back outside the story. For a breath, no one moved. The chandelier hummed faintly above them. A candle near the lavender flickered. Claire's hand closed around the brass key in her pocket, the same key that had opened this house when her mother was alive, when the walls smelled of cedar, when love still felt like something that could be repaired. Then she looked directly at Daniel and spoke without raising her voice. "You always confused possession with ownership." Behind him, blue and red lights swept across the windows, washing over Vanessa's pale dress, the gold lettering on the engagement cards, the portrait of Eleanor Hayes, and Daniel's suddenly empty hands. The county officer stepped inside. Ethan followed, and for the first time that evening, the house no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like the truth entering through the front door. The county officer crossed the threshold with the sealed document held flat against his chest, and every guest seemed to understand at once that this was not an interruption Daniel could charm away. Ethan Caldwell remained beside him, quiet, precise, his leather folder already open. One of the officers stood near the entryway, not threatening anyone, simply present in the way official consequences are present when politeness has failed. Vanessa still held her champagne glass, but the bubbles had gone still, and her fingers had tightened around the stem until her knuckles looked pale beneath the chandelier. Daniel reached for the paper before it was offered, but the county officer kept it in his own hands. "Mr. Daniel Whitman," he said, reading from the first page. "This order concerns the property located at this address and the unlawful continued occupancy following formal notice." A murmur moved through the room, soft as silk dragging over stone. Vanessa looked at Daniel quickly. "What does that mean?" Daniel did not answer her. His eyes were fixed on Ethan. "You cannot just walk into a private engagement party." Ethan's voice stayed level. "The event is part of the violation, Mr. Whitman. You were notified 3 times that you did not have authorization to host, lease, occupy, alter, or assign use of this property." The words were not dramatic. They were worse. They were exact. Ethan placed copies of the documents on the marble console table Claire had bought with her first bonus from the architecture firm where she once worked weekends to afford the restoration. County deed, estate transfer, property tax record, certified delivery receipts, formal demand to vacate, court-approved enforcement order. Each page made less noise than Vanessa's toast had, but each one carried more weight. Daniel glanced toward the guests as if hoping one of them might still see him as the man he had been performing all night. No one stepped forward. Even the caterers had stopped moving. A server stood frozen near the dining room arch with a silver tray of untouched glasses. The county officer continued. "The listed owner of record is Claire Eleanor Whitman. No transfer of ownership to Daniel Whitman appears in the county records. No authorization appears for Vanessa Cole to reside at or host events on the property." Vanessa's name, spoken aloud in that room, changed her posture completely. Her shoulders lowered by an inch. Her smile disappeared, leaving behind a younger, frightened expression she had tried to decorate out of existence. "Daniel," she whispered, "you told me this was handled." Daniel finally turned on Claire, not with power now, but with panic dressed as anger. "You planned this." Claire stood beneath her mother's portrait with the lavender petal in her pocket and the old brass key warm against her palm. She looked at the man who had mistaken her patience for weakness and her grief for permission. "I waited," she said. "There is a difference." Ethan handed Vanessa a separate copy of the notice. "Miss Cole, you are named as an unauthorized occupant and event host. You are required to leave the premises tonight and arrange removal of personal property through the county office. You may contact counsel if you have questions." Vanessa stared at the paper as if the ink itself had betrayed her. The diamond on her finger no longer looked like a promise. It looked like a receipt for a life built on someone else's foundation. Around the room, guests began setting down their glasses with careful, embarrassed clicks. One woman removed her coat from a chair. A man near the fireplace slipped his phone into his pocket, suddenly ashamed that he had recorded the toast. Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing convincing came out. The house, which had endured laughter, false names, cut flowers, and stolen confidence, seemed to exhale through every old beam. Claire did not smile. She did not need to. The truth had finally learned to speak in stamps, signatures, and county seals. The guests left without finishing their champagne. One by one, they crossed the marble floor with lowered eyes, collecting coats from chairs, purses from side tables, and dignity from wherever they had dropped it during Vanessa's toast. The front door opened and closed again and again, letting in cold Connecticut air that moved through the house like a quiet cleansing. No one congratulated Daniel. No one asked Vanessa to show the ring. The gold-lettered engagement cards remained on the table beside candles burning down into uneven pools of wax. Vanessa stood near the fireplace with the notice in both hands, reading the same lines over and over, as if a different ending might appear if she stared long enough. Her diamond trembled under the chandelier. "You said she walked away from all of this," she whispered to Daniel. "You said it was yours." Daniel looked smaller now, not because anything about his body had changed, but because the room had stopped borrowing importance for him. Without the laughter, without the guests, without Vanessa's admiration shining beside him, he was only a man standing in a house whose walls knew better. Claire, he said, turning toward her with a voice she had not heard in years, careful and low. We can talk about this. There had been a time when those words would have opened something in her. A door, a wound, a foolish little hope. Tonight, they passed over her like air over stone. Claire looked at the lavender scattered across the engagement table, at the portrait of her mother watching from above the mantel, at the staircase where Eleanor had once paused to catch her breath and smile anyway. We already did, Claire said. You just never listened. Ethan stood by the entryway, giving her space without abandoning her to the moment. The county officer explained the next steps in a calm voice. Vanessa would leave tonight. Daniel would leave tonight. Personal belongings would be scheduled for removal through proper channels. The house would be secured. The words were ordinary, almost procedural, but they carried the weight of a season ending. Vanessa slowly pulled the ring from her finger. She did not throw it. She did not make a scene. She placed it on the engagement table beside her own printed name. And for the first time all evening, she looked at the mansion not like a crown, but like a room she had entered without understanding the cost of the floor beneath her feet. Daniel watched her do it, then looked back at Claire as if she might rescue him from the collapse he had built. Claire did not move. After they were gone, the house settled into a silence so complete that she could hear the faint ticking of the old clock in the library. The candles were blown out. The rented flowers were carried away. Claire walked to the window and opened it a few inches, letting the cold air clear the perfume, the candle smoke, the false celebration. Then she took the lavender petal from her pocket and placed it in the small blue vase her mother used to keep on the mantel. Beside it, she set the old brass key. For the first time in years, the key did not feel like a memory of what she had lost. It felt like proof of what had waited for her to return. Claire looked at Eleanor's portrait, and in the quiet, the house no longer felt wounded. It felt awake. Daniel had thought he replaced her. Vanessa had thought she inherited her place. But some homes remember the hands that saved them, and some women do not need to raise their voices to reclaim everything that was always theirs.